welcome to RITSEC. It's week 9 this week, so congratulations on making it this far in the semester. I don't know how I did, but we're here, so good job, everyone. So please sign in, as always. We appreciate it. Helps us know who's here, who's not, et cetera, et cetera. So please sign in, and then in like a minute or two, we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you.
Probably on the other end of the slides.
Yeah, I need to. Yeah. Yeah, but thank you to our sponsors. Just give a shout out to them. So here they are. But to continue on, today is this for that education portion this week. We are, oh, sorry. No, we're not doing the news. We're doing the education portion. We're going to do introduction to CTF today. So we have our CTF pro up here, Duc Phan. He's going to be walking through our, yeah, give him a round of applause. Yeah, clap it up. So, but he's going to be going over just some basics of, he's going to be going over just some basics of CTFs and how they work, and kind of give you an intro to them, because I believe this Saturday we have, is it the Parsons CTF? Yes, the Parsons CTF is going on this Saturday. I believe it starts at 10 o'clock?
I have no idea. It's 12 to 6.
12 to 6, thank you. So 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. I believe it's going to be in the CSEC labs. So after this introduction to CTF, I'd highly recommend to go over, check it out. You can maybe even get a job offer. I know people who have went to CTF and actually got job offers or interview offers after. So definitely go there, check it out, and go there and hone your CTF skills and your security skills. So I'm going to give it over to Duc. So thank you, Duc, for presenting this week.
I'm just gonna keep going with this.
You can like flip it on here and then just put that in place.
And how to do this? Alright, so hello everyone, I'm Duc. I'm currently a third-year student, and I do a bunch of CTF in my free time. So today I'd like to introduce you guys to some basic CTF that you're gonna have maybe this weekend if you come to. So let's capture the flag. Apparently not this one that I'm talking about. So what's the real CTF here? So in general, you are given like some program that can be solved using a computer, and you're supposed to find like a special format of string, like this one. So usually the format of the string is like the name of CTF, and then open brackets, and then some meaningful strings, and then close brackets. And you can do whatever you want to figure that out, as long as you follow the rules of the CTF. So don't break the challenges if others are doing that as well. Don't take down the scoreboard, and don't share the flags between teams, because that is not how competition works. And in some of the cases, you don't have to brute force the whole flag. And if you have to do it, you're probably doing it wrong. There's some cases where you can still brute force like parts of the flags, but in general, you don't have to do that. So why should you do CTF? So if you're new to security and you have no idea what you want to do, or you have no idea what you should do, I really recommend you take part in CTF, because that is also how I started out in security as well. There are a lot of stuff you can do in security, and it's just like a massive amount of knowledge that you can learn. So CTF has a lot of categories of challenges where you can just dive in and do any of them. And if this one doesn't work out, you can still move on to the next one. So it's just like something you can try and figure out what you want to do. And there are many challenges that will help you think outside the box. So it's like finding a way to make something work not intended. And also during the process of solving a challenge, that will really help you build the intuition to like look for patterns or like look up for information, because a lot of stuff you will learn in security is based on like how you look up information and how you can teach yourself all of that. Like, to be honest, classes are not going to teach you all of that. So I'm going to say a great portion of learning is by yourself, and it is really helpful how you know to look up information based on like things you can find given a piece of information. And usually one CTF lasts for about like 1 or 2 days, and there are a lot of challenges that you can do and need to do if you want to get like a good place. And that is where teamwork comes in. So usually there are not a lot of CTF that you could play solo. Most of them are team-based. So for example, we have Team Contagion here, and usually you have practices. We occasionally take part in CTF, and you should really take part in that. So it's just kind of like a way for you to communicate with your teammates and learn how to do that in a short amount of time. And there's still like a bunch of other reasons that you should do CTF, but it's not listed here. And the second thing is, why shouldn't you do CTF? Well, it is really addictive, and at least for me, it's like that. Or if you just don't like it, but I hope you like it. So there are 2 types of CTF in general. The first type is Jeopardy. This type usually has like a few categories of challenges as shown here. So for example, reverse engineering, binary exploitation, or sometimes that's called PWN, and forensics, cryptography, web application, and miscellaneous, which is just like everything you can think of and could not think of. So I'm just going to go into each of these and give you example of those challenges to see, so you can see how it usually goes in CTF. So the first one is reverse engineering. In these type of challenges, you are usually given a piece of program without the source code, and you need to go and figure out what that does. And typically, you are given a C or C++ program, but there are also a ton of other things that can be categorized as reverse engineering as well. So for example, I have done like a mobile reverse engineering CTF where you're given like APK, there are .NET binaries, there are WebAssembly programs, and there are even like bootloaders. So there are a lot of things that can be categorized as reverse engineering. And eventually in these type challenges, you need to figure out an input that satisfies some requirements. And when you feed that input to the program, it will tell you the flag. So an example of this, so as you can see here, I have the binary called RE, short for reverse engineering. So it's asking me for a password, and just from the binary, I already have the binary, and I have to figure out the password. So I give it a random string that's apparently not a password, but if I give it the right password, it's going to tell me that I win. So there are a few ways to kind of get started on these type challenges. So the first thing I usually do is run strings on the binary to see if there's any like interesting string. So for example, this is the output from the string command when I run it on the binary. And because the flag here is hard-coded, I can see it in the output. But in more complicated challenges, you usually have to use the program called disassembler or sometimes decompilers to actually understand the execution flow of the program. So for example, down here is a screenshot from a disassembler called Binary Ninja, which is basically it translate the binary to low-level machine code, which is assembly. And from these assembly instructions, you will get an idea of how the program works and understand how the input is being processed. And from there, you can figure out the right input for that. So it is a lot of work. And the next category is pretty relevant to reverse engineering. It's called binary exploitation, or you can hear it as pwn. So in this type challenge, you're given a vulnerable program, and typically this program is running on a remote server, and you can interact with it using a thing called socket connection, usually by using the netcat program. And the goal here is typically to gain remote code execution or just get a shell on that remote machine that's running this program. And the way you kind of do this challenge is you need to use reverse engineering to first figure out what this program does. And when you're trying to figure out what it does, you will see some vulnerability in this program. And the way you get the shell is by exploiting these vulnerabilities. So there are some common types of things that you need to exploit. So the really common one is stack-based buffer overflow. And the more complicated one sometimes is heap-based buffer overflow, which just basically means the program takes in some inputs, and you make it takes in more than it can take. So that is basically what buffer overflow means. And sometimes you can also encounter like integer overflow or underflow, and also just a combination of everything. Although it sounds like there's not much, but in each of these types of vulnerabilities, you will find like a lot of variation. So an example of this, I have a program that is running through network connection. It's running on this port on my machine. And right here, I connect to the service using the netcat program. So it's asking me for some input, and I give it something. It doesn't give me anything back. But the second time, I try to give it some other input after I have figured out how to exploit it. And it gives me a different thing, which is called shell. And by using a shell, I can interact with that remote server, and I can run commands on it. And typically, when you get a shell, you will need to you will need to output the flag that is on the server. So it's a lot of fun. The next category is forensics. So a lot of things can be also categorized as forensics. So usually in this type challenges, you are given some piece of information. It can be a lot of things. So like you're given a JPEG, an image, or zip file, or a Wireshark capture, or even like an image of a disk. And pretty much you need to figure out a way to make sense of this information, typically by finding the right tools to use. And some of the things that you may look for in this data is metadata, or like maybe some covert channel in the packet capture. But there are a lot of other things as well. So right here is just an example of how you examine the metadata to figure out the flag. So suppose that I'm given this image, and just that image, I need to figure out the flag on my own. So the first thing I would think of is looking at the metadata of the file, and OK, here it is. So that program, SF2, is a program to help you see all the metadata like of a file. And the flag here is hidden in the copyright strings of this image. So it's just a very simple example of this type challenges. And for more complicated one, you even sometimes have to like script or like write programs to solve this type of challenge. And the next one is cryptography. This is also a really interesting one. And typically in this type challenge, you are given some encrypted data. It can be text file, or it can be binary data, which also includes like non-printable characters. And there are about 2 ways that you can solve this challenge. The first one is you may figure out the encryption algorithm and try to decrypt it sometimes by brute forcing the key, or sometimes you can also be given an implementation of the algorithm, and usually the implementation is going to be vulnerable to some types of attack, and you will somehow need to exploit the vulnerability in that implementation. Most of the time, it involves like a lot of math. Math is fun, just me. So an example of this, a very common example of this, is the XOR encryption. So it basically means the encryption key is 1 byte, and you encrypt the plaintext by XOR each byte in the input with the key. And right here, I have an encrypted text, and following that is a small Python script to just brute force all the value of the key, because the key is just 1 byte, so which basically means like about 255 values. So I can basically iterate through all of them, and by running that script, I can figure out all the possible outputs of that, and there should be some output that makes sense. Like you can see the format of the flags happen there. So way down here is the flag, CTF is fun, please do it. And I think web is the next one. It is really fun, especially when you have taken some class here in the CSEC department. So it involves a lot of type of vulnerabilities because web app is just a lot of stuff. So some common ones that I have listed here. So for example, SQL injection, which basically means you interact with the database and you extract some information from it or doing something with that to gain further access into the challenge. Local remote file inclusion, cross-site scripting. So cross-site scripting, I think recently got into CTF because right now people can build like some checker. For example, they will kind of build like some headless browser that can do exactly what a typical user would do. And for cross-site scripting, usually the goal is to just like pop some dialog box on the website. And by using a checker, they can check if your payload actually does that or not. And the next thing in the list is PHP stuff. PHP is really weird. And there are a lot of stuff in that as well. So you should just like try to see how it goes and you will see how weird it is. And next type is command injection. I haven't seen a lot of CTF that has this one. Usually to get command injection, you will have to do other things before you get to the injection point. And a very interesting one is CSS injection. This is not common, I guess, but for the most recent one I see is in the Google CTF in this past summer, where they do like a really crazy one, CSS injection to like fool a bot into giving you the flag. So what's a good way to do all this web stuff? Maybe you can take the CSEC 380 class here at RIT. It is a lot of fun. It's a web application security class. I highly recommend taking it, and you will get a lot of it. Okay, so this is a very basic example of SQL injection. So basically in SQL injection, you kind of deal with like some login forms or just any forms that takes in your input and doing something against the database. So for example, this login form, it has like a username field and a password field. And by giving the form this input, I am able to gain access into a page that I don't have a valid account for, and I don't have to know the password. And when I got into the website, I got the flag. So, and I think this is the last category in the Jeopardy style of the CTF is miscellaneous. It can be a lot of stuff. It can be anything you could and could not think of. It can be programming to automate solving a puzzle. So for example, it's gonna give you like a short program, and you will have to write like an optimizer for that, so that it execute less instruction. And sometimes it can be combination of any of the categories before that. So for example, I have seen challenges that combine both web and binary exploitation. And yeah, it's just like anything that cannot be really categorized as one of the category before. And okay, so I'm just gonna move on to the second side of the CTF, which is, I would say, not regularly held because it requires like a lot more infrastructure than the previous type CTF. So usually in this attack defense style CTF, teams are provided with an infrastructure with workstation running some particular services, and these services has vulnerabilities in that. And your goal is at the same time have to go and exploit these services on different teams' workstation to get their flags. And another thing you can also do is patching your own service so that other teams cannot get the flag on your machines. It is really interactive, and although I haven't taken part in any of this before, I assume that is a lot of fun. So these are some resources that I highly recommend checking out. So for example, CTF 101 right here is, I'd say, a really comprehensive guide to CTF. They have a lot of challenges from easy, medium to hard to really hard. And also, we have the CTF interest group, Team Contagion. We have practice every Tuesday night from 7 p.m. to whenever you want. And I think we are getting some really dope presentation about binary exploitation by Stewart way over there. So I highly recommend you try these out and come to our practices, and hopefully CTF is gonna get you something that you feel interested about and want to work on that. So yeah, thanks for listening.
We have a demo.
Oh, no.
Oh no.
Oh, it's on you.
So, for the demo this week, hold on 1 second. I'm going to post something, and it will not have a file attached, but it will in about 5 minutes.